Manifest Destiny, all that was apparently spread about by Rothschild interest in the bank. I think the idea was to create a war. This is the theory. I'm not saying this is the truth, but it has some validity, I think, that to start a war that Lincoln would have to finance by borrowing money, and Lincoln didn't. He issued the greenbacks, which perhaps factored into his assassination. Of course, by that time, Lincoln had many people who wanted to kill him, so it might have been something else. But it is, talk about John Wilkes Booth's connection to Masonry and all that.
Knights of the Golden Circle.
Yeah,
right.
And his that ring up in Canada and all that. So it was that was a conspiracy. So
yes, absolutely. Yeah, and that was another point I was trying to argue, that just because you get offed doesn't mean that you're a martyr.
You're right. Yeah. You still be a tool.
I mean, thugs murder other thugs all the time. So
yeah. So that doesn't. So so now we're dealing with stupid libertarian. We're running out of time here. So you made a comment. Stupid libertarianism, not being able to cope with the idea of deep state, power politics, corruption. Want to go into that a little bit? Their inability to deal with the reality of say.
Yeah.
Okay.
Again, I mean, if we look at the history of liberty movements as a whole, I mean, we can really just see this as something that, I mean, again, it really just depends on how far back you want to go. But I think, the French Revolution is a pretty obvious one for modernity as marking a specific point where we can say that, power interests were definitely involved in this so-called revolution, which was really, intimately tied into Masonry. This is where we get the rise of Grand Orient Masonry. And some people have made some interesting arguments that Britain may have been involved in French Revolution from the background, or at least bankers. There's probably something to that. But from the perspective of just the movement or the revolutions themselves, it's interesting that what happens is you have the Commune and you have the Committee for Public Safety and Robespierre and all that, and then you have the Commune, and you have the second attempt at establishing the revolution after that fails, and then that fails, and then we have Napoleon. So we have this imperialism that arises out of the syndicalism. So to me, that's illustrative, because really that's where it always goes. That this is, as has been pointed out by many people many times, and as Plato pointed out, the democracy ends in the oligarchy. It ends in the tyranny and the dictatorship, and there's a reason for that, because it's just a pendulum swing of the dialectic, and ultimately the democracy was always controlled from behind the scenes by those who were clever manipulators of the human mind. So, think about Bernays' statement in Propaganda. He says, we are controlled by men behind the scenes whom we never see and probably will never see. And that's really the secret of democracy all along. So democracy is a trick, it's a tool, a technique for destabilization, and it always has been. We think about destabilization in geopolitics, referring to things like Ukraine, or Rose revolutions, Orange revolutions, and all that, which it is, but that's not a new idea, right? This is an old idea. And if I recall, even in Caesar's works, he talks about this. He talks about how you can, create dissension within the enemy camp, spread lies and rumors and so forth with the barbarians, is what he did with these different tribes. Machiavelli discusses it in Art of War. So, again, the old idea is nothing new here, nothing new to see. So when we come to the idea of liberty, I make the argument that liberty doesn't exist without a context. There's no such thing as like generic liberty that's just this idea that like floats out there, and then you read a bunch of books and you get to a certain point, then you're there. Liberty as a philosophical concept always requires some other context, right? So for example, this is what I argued in my demotic cult piece, if I don't have a conception of personhood, which is a philosophical notion, then liberty doesn't even make sense, right? So liberty presupposes that you have actors, persons with wills and faculties and some sort of sense of rights, right? And so this is why libertarian history, libertarian movements have operated on the basis of natural right philosophy, which I don't think ultimately works, because it's not when you have concomitant with that the presupposition of empiricism, which most do, or Aristotelianism, say with Ayn Rand or something like that, what happens is the idea of the natural right is, I mean, why do I not have the natural right to take away your natural rights, right? So the libertarians always talk about this negative position of the state and the nonviolence principle and all this stuff. But there's no reason why there's a nonviolence principle, right? And it's always a reification of the thing that they just said, right? So you're not supposed to bring harm to another person. Well, that's basically just utilitarianism, and utilitarianism has all kinds of flaws at a fundamental level that show that it's completely unworkable. One of my favorites, of course, is the example of the person who, this is a classic problem for utilitarianism. There's nothing in utilitarianism about the general good or the not harming of other people, however you want to phrase it. There's nothing in that that tells you which kind of harm you have to avoid and not avoid, right? So if I buy the stream that my village gets its water from, and I don't let anyone have that water, or I pollute it, that's my right, because I own that stream, right? And there's nothing that now that may not be an overt assault or attack harming a person. It may be a covert attack harming a person, but there's nothing within the schema or the system of libertarian philosophy or thought that can actually explain why that is objectively metaphysically wrong. And so we even have those statements from, say, Friedman, that says you can't make an argument that someone has to take care of a baby. They will, he thinks, but you can't argue that they have to, or that there's any necessity placed upon that action. So we're basically just back at you can't get is from an ought. So I would just say David Hume is good enough if I adopt those principles to critique it as unworkable. The other example I wanted to give for utilitarianism is that there's nothing that gives you any benchmark to decide whether quantitative pleasure or qualitative pleasure is to be preferred in a situation where we're concerned about the good of others, right? So we might have a situation where if a village was experiencing a rash of murders, and the law enforcement of whatever kind, even if it's a private security firm, not a state law enforcement, if the private security firm decided that it was in the best interest, based on the social contract of everyone around them, to find a patsy to assuage everyone's fears, then there's nothing in libertarianism that shows that there's anything wrong with doing that. You say, well, but that's hurting another person, right? That's killing another person. That would be a violation of the principle. They say, well, but wait a minute. It's not. It may be hurting one person, but the quantitative level of good that we can accomplish through this act outweighs the bad in the moral calculus here. So. Again, I realize that not every libertarian would necessarily affirm classic utilitarianism and Bentham or something like that. But what I'm saying is that we have the same ideas at work here, the same philosophical problems, and they all start from the idea of the individual sort of being the atomistic unit that is the sort of the benchmark arbiter of what is and is not true, what is good and evil. And that's the problem with all of those kinds of systems that start with the assumption of the primacy of the particular against the one.
Now, what you say, and now, I know someone might say, well, my idea of libertarianism would be, it's not so much a philosophy of life, it spells out my relationship to the state. And there's so much more to civilization, so much more to the community than politics. Mm-hmm. And we have civil society, we have mutual aid societies, benevolent associations, family, churches, and these things comprise the real meat of society. And that's this is what it's the commerce, the free commerce, the goodwill among people trading amongst each other, that make life pleasant and they create all the good things in life. And I guess the difference between the Watchman state versus the anarchy. They would say that, well, I'm a libertarian to the extent that this is how I think I should relate to the state, whether the state should exist or not. It doesn't necessarily mean that I apply libertarianism political thought to my idea of God or my religion.
Sure.
So there's much more to life than politics. And I see it as a way to kind of to cordon off or to marginalize politics as much as possible, because politics is theft and violence.
Right. I'm going to have to go soon, but
sure, yes.
But maybe next time we can delve more into that very topic, because I would like to speak to that. But just quickly in response, what I would say is that I think it's difficult to construct a position where you want to make moral, objective, social claims that is only restricted to one sphere. And I would make an argument to that case, but it would be sort of a protracted argument that would take a little while. But
I've kept you longer than
it's okay. It's okay.
I'll let you go. Let's enjoy the rest of your evening. Okay, well, we'll get back. Maybe we'll talk a little later on that and some other topics, because your website provides it's a wealth of material. So,
well, I might try to. That's a good question you've asked, and so I might try to flesh out some ideas on that in the article this week or something.
Yeah, because it's one of the it's something where a lot of people think that libertarians they're creating a philosophy of life, and I've heard some say this is just how I think this should involve. This is how I think the state should operate, and there's so much more to life than that. So, okay, well, we covered a lot tonight. Thanks a lot for coming, and good night, and thanks a lot.
All right, thank you, Tim.
Thanks.
Bye.
Good night.